whilst we are waiting for the others to connect, there were two things that came to mind in the discussion was not many of people have asked what is knowledge driven, and I think everyone talks data driven. Not many people talk knowledge driven, but we sort of got an understanding of that yesterday when we looked at semantics and we started to understand that next level that we go to. So that's an important one. And then one of the comments you made was to say the arguing, and it reminded me of what Zane was saying in terms of data literacy. And MIT defines it as all the read and write data, but I think the one that I really liked was the argue with data. So can you argue with data? The pros and cons. So that's quite something where we need to get our people into that area. All right, fantastic.
Maybe Howard, just to pause quickly, just for those that were new, please log on to www.menti.com using the code that's on the top of the screen, 8046871. And as I mentioned earlier, we just really like the engagement. We run a series of polls or questionnaires, and we'd really appreciate your feedback as we go. And if you want to ask a question, you can hit the question mark button. If you like something, you can hit the thumbs up, or don't like something, hit the thumbs down. And then also welcome to use the chat room to ask your questions or make your statements, and I'll be attending and watching those for us all. Thanks, Howard. Sorry.
Great, no problem. All right, so just wanted to see, we've got 3. All right, I think we got most of the people there. Okay, so we are on the data executive. This has been our definition of a data executive. So not to go through that again. These were some of the data skills that a CDO should have. I always like talking about the T skills, and almost the sort of top 3 give us the T, and the bottom 3 give us the I, or the single line going down. And so that's quite important from an executive point of view. So these are the areas that we drill down into more of the technical, and these are the areas that we go wider, and we use those to convince the board and the executives to follow the vision. Now, the top 3 roadblocks that we came on was lack of focus. So we dealt with that in terms of data strategy, and today we're going to deal with cultural challenges. And I've got to admit that it's taken me many years to pay attention to this. A lot of the times I wasn't aware of the importance and how to deal with cultural challenges, and I suppose I'm not really referring to society, people type of issues where they do come into play, but what is your data culture? How does your organization operate? And not so much at an individual or a social level. So this is more the area we're talking about. And then we sort of mentioned data literacy, which we'll be tackling next week. We've been doing quite a bit of research. Zane, I can help you there with 3 or 4 different programs that are online that talk to literacy. That would be helpful to share with people when they want to establish a literacy program. All right, so corporate culture. And I always said, okay, if I've got a change manager, then that's their problem. They must deal with the corporate culture or the cultural side of it. I only realized in the last year and a half that I was being a bit silly or naive. So as usual, I like to start with the definition. Corporate culture refers to the beliefs, behaviors, that determine how a company's employees and management interact and handle outside business transactions. I actually quite like that. So there's one thing interacting with a customer and being very patient and things like that, but how tolerant are we of each other in terms of making mistakes? We think of a lot of the AI, machine learning, advanced analytics. We've got to get used to making mistakes. And we've got to fall, and we've got to keep on going. Now, a lot of Agile is trying to deal with that, but there's also a culture to that we have to focus on. So often corporate culture is implied, not expressly defined, and develops organically over time from cumulative traits in people the company hires. Now, a data culture, interestingly enough, that starts getting its framework from the CDO. So the execs start to lay that one down, and if they are not standing for things and setting their vision and imparting that and being pretty open and listening and things like that, the CDO starts closing it down in terms of the culture. And that's something that I wasn't really aware of and I only started picking up lately. When you look at the de-embark in terms of some of the data strategy and governance and stuff like that, one of the inputs is corporate culture. And I've never really been handed over a document that describes our corporate culture to work with. I don't know if any of you have.
No. And if you do see it, it's sort of a 5-pointer that doesn't really tell you anything.
Right. So it's amazing how important this guy is, but how little we understand, which is you start to realize why things go wrong. So before giving you sort of my view of the different elements of corporate culture, I wanted to just ask you guys to give us some feedback in terms of hard elements that are affected by culture. So hard elements are the best way for me to describe them, that they're not soft issues like people issues. So if you wouldn't mind just typing in a couple of things that you understand to be hard elements affected by culture. So it's not going to be buildings. Well, I suppose it may be if you're going to design your own building, if you think of Apple and Google, but we're not there at the moment. Okay. Yeah, that's a good example. Okay. All right. So that's quite nice. And then let's go after hard elements. Let's go to soft elements that are related to culture. So these tend to be the things that start making up the culture or will become points that one can identify and describe our culture. Yep. I suppose this is something that I've also been picking up, is our work ethic can be so radically different, almost opposite ends of the spectrum. And there's nothing really telling us what's appropriate or how does this fit in. And so we start picking up expectations when our work ethics are different, and we start causing problems and challenges. Okay, great. So these are, I really like this diagram, and I try to explain to, certainly when we work with the change managers, in terms of, so our strategy is affected by the corporate culture, the structure, the operating model. So when we go and design operating models for the data management area, we need to pay attention to our corporate culture. And I always try to use this example when talking about the differences of corporate culture. The difference that I find between working with the Reserve Bank or the central bank and compared to working with an insurance company, the cultures can be quite different. So you'll find within the Reserve Bank, because it's all about regulations and keeping the rules and understanding what's going on and policing, it's very much a controlled corporate culture. So, and there's certain ways you got to behave and certain things that you got to do. And if you try to set, for example, a non-invasive data governance strategy or operating model or culture, it just doesn't work. And you start failing and you don't realize why or what you got to look at to make some of these decisions around our operating model. And then even systems to an extent start to affect our culture, and the culture starts to affect the systems. And then lower down, we've got skills, shared values, and staff. So these are our softer elements in the blue and the hard elements in the yellow. Okay. Any comments, observations? Welcome, Corne. All right. Okay, so this is something that really struck me almost about 2 years ago. It took me then another 6 months to realize how important it was, or to actually agree. I always thought when we were doing these strategies that we can lay down the strategy, get our roadmaps, get our initiatives, get everything done, start mobilizing the people, only to find 1 or 2 failures, and then you realize I need to pay attention to this. And I suppose that's when you really learn. But I like this thing of a phrase by Peter Drucker. He's one of the top marketing people. And basically says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I like to put this one down in terms of culture wins over and over again. So this is a reality. Any company disconnecting the two are putting their success at risk. Organization culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so don't leave it unattended. Typical Pac-Man approach. Okay. Anyone disagree with that, or think that we can control it purely by delegating goals, pushing down in like roadmaps and things like that across the organization?
No, so I think the key one, I think, Howard, is it would actually, like we do, for instance, what we found is to actually incorporate it as part of the strategy, because change management and adoption is probably just as important, if not more important,
You're right,
than trying to bring sort of enforced strategy in the company. And if we don't focus on that strategy bit, yeah, you're going to put in a lot of time and effort and not get any reward for it.
Correct. And especially if you're data disabled. So if people are resistant to data, you can put as much vision down there as you like. That's not going to overtake them, and probably they'll get more resistant on not listening to the data and continuing to make decisions from the feeling, the tacit knowledge that they have. So we're going to go away to do that. So this is one of the elements that we put on in terms of from a success factor, and it's important there, and I've done it in my last data strategy, is to actually, one of the nice things about it is when you present it to the board, you can put your critical success factors down, and of course one of the things you're saying is business have got to commit to it. That if we don't help them get this culture and change management right, we're not going to get the engagement, we're not going to get a lot of these other things. So let's get that sorted out. Someone used an interesting phrase, which I quite like, almost to say, if people aren't getting your data jokes, then you better start looking at the culture and change management, unless you are really they don't understand your sense of humor. So, all right. So why do we care? And like to take this one through and understand it in a little bit different areas, because in talking to some of the change managers, they don't always agree that their culture changes their responsibility. The other thing that I got mixed up was thinking that communications was change management related. So culture we see as the sum of the shared values, the beliefs, the norms and behaviors. And what I find a lot of the change management focusing at a behavioral level, right? So they would go and chat to the people and understand why they're behaving in that way. How do we get more engagement and things like that? But this idea of looking at the norms and shared values, I haven't seen anything that says here are our shared values, but they're critical in terms of understanding what that culture is all about and then how to structure the culture. So there's no worthwhile strategy that can be planned without taking into account the organization's ability to execute it. Now, one of the mistakes I made in the beginning was focusing, I think I've shared with you these three elements of your urgent data strategy, your intermediate data strategy, and then your target data strategy. And I always put urgent data strategy is great for your first gen CDO, which is going to deal with all of the problems of data management or the complete lack thereof. Then the intermediate one I typically allocate towards people, on the people side, only to learn that there's also the cultural side that needs to be adapted there. So in your first 90 days, as they talk about it, yes, you can be identifying the big ticket items in terms of data management challenges. Then we've got to get the people to execute it. Then we've got to get the culture to execute as well. And then it's the norms and behaviors that we've got to start addressing along that area. Then we start getting ready for the target data strategy to take place. It's not to say that they go in a serial progression. They can certainly happen in parallel. They need to happen in parallel. You need to start showing some value and getting people. One of the most amazing things about changing some of this behavior is when you start using data to show them what they've never seen before. And that starts to get them excited. So you can't pull the rabbit out of the hat without some level of analytics and visualization. All right. So now I don't know too many of us that are doing it. So this may be a mute point, and I'm hoping that no model doesn't get all of them. But have you guys seen a culture model? Have you ever worked with a culture model, a model that explains the culture that you're sitting in and the things that are going on within those different, most of them are set up in quadrants, but not all of them. So just wondering how many. Oh, no model. Any other takers? Sure.
Howard?
Yes.
Probably just, maybe I wasn't listening or I wasn't paying any attention, but I've been around in a number of businesses and working obviously with a number of businesses, and I've never heard of a culture model.
Yeah, I mean,
I've never heard the term. I've heard about obviously the term culture. What is our culture? But
yes.
Definition, a structured definition of the culture.
Right.
So this is interesting. I might not be the only one, but definitely, like I say, unless I wasn't paying attention or I wasn't listening. But
no, I think you're right. I was involved in. I went to EDW in 2018. This is when my journey started, I, by mistake, walked into a presentation that was talking about data culture. And you realize for the first time, like anything, that if culture is going to eat strategy for breakfast and I don't have a way of plotting my path and mapping out my culture, then I'm actually in trouble.
Yeah.
So of course that was nice to see that. And here are the different organizational models of culture. Here's just a few that I shared with you, and really exciting in terms of what you can see and the way in which you map the different elements. So as an example, you can see here, this is control, and I know Corne is over here, so he can sort of attest to some of the things that look like in the central bank. Those guys are all about control. It's a lot like the army. It's a lot like the kitchens. You know, when you go into a kitchen, and there's everything's about control.
So just a comment from my side. So a lot of times, I think most organizations is only now starting to realize how do you do culture models.
Yes.
But you cannot do that independently, and a lot of them, I think, takes comfort in the fact that they've got kind of vision and a mission statement for the company.
Right.
And they assume that the culture is driven out of the vision and mission statements.
Right. And they almost feel that they can engineer, and you know how we do it from a hierarchy point of view. We set our vision, we set our mission, then we do our strategy, we then break it down into initiatives, we start assigning goals, and we start telling people to work according to the goals. And then we're not sure why they're not reacting to it. So you're right. We do miss this point entirely, and I think that was a big surprise for me. And then you start recognizing where you go wrong. So this is the one that we've started to work with in terms of making your current culture work. And you can almost apply this within your data governance, and that's what really blew me away. Almost if you're picking up an organizational culture and you got a map, you start getting some good clues. So just to explain that a little bit better, we have control. So that's all about centralized control, stability, rules, regulations. And everyone refers to that as governance 1.0, which was all about command and control. And then we look at other areas, which is about competency, craftsmanship, institutional knowledge, strategy and planning. And this is really about some of your disruptors and your startups that focus purely on performance, competency, driving the performance. And then we've got cultivation, which is could be somehow described in terms of NPOs and then also collaboration type of scenario. So we've now got to work out what mix we want our data governance environment to have. So, I mean, one of the things that you can't get away from in terms of control is you can't get away from compliance, right? So there are just some aspects that you've got to bring in. If we're looking about papaya and we don't want our CIOs or our information officers going to jail, we've got to start having some level of control. We can't just be all about nice harmony. We don't want any challenges. We don't want people to have to adhere to certain things. We got some challenges in that area. So this is sort of what we looking to build is we try to have this grouping and understanding, and then we almost want to put our culture in a certain amount of area. And as I was saying just now, there's no ways in the current day that you can have no control. And of course, you can't have any competency, okay? So we've got to build this thing correctly. So Cultivation is high priority on growth and development, and that's on the people side. We then got collaboration, which is high priority on collaboration and synergy, all the different, how do we interact together, the teams, the things like that. Control is high priority on order and structure, centralized. That's the way it goes. And then federated versus networked. So do we federate and then network? Do we bring in some level of control? And competency is all about high performance. Okay, now I don't think I've ever seen an area that's just in one quadrant, but there's a dominant feeling to it, and you sort of got to choose where's your dominance, where do you want to create the norm in that scenario. Any questions on that?
Howard, I might be wrong, but also if you don't understand this model, and like you said, because your culture should probably always at all times touch each quadrant, at least, even if it's in a small amount, sort of control or competence, whatever.
Yeah.
You may have a dominant area, that's fine. But if you don't understand the model, you might just feel like schizophrenic most of the time, because a certain individual or department might be a little bit more weighted in one area than the other, and you actually can't figure out where this as a whole sits in terms of these quadrants, and you can't then plot and plan from there. So it's important to understand all aspects and then try and obviously have that plan of how you're going to adjust your strategy into the area to focus on an area that you need to.
Yeah.
But I just see, like, coming from where I came from, a few companies, sometimes you feel schizophrenic because you don't know whether to be saving or running or geez. So anyway, just the observation on that. But this is
and I think sometimes depending on your sort of what's that, A type, B type, or and I always refer to my wife. I think she's got a B minus 99 type, where she'll be trying to wash the curtains just before we leave. You then get frustrated because you don't understand how it operates. So you put in structures that are alien to that level. And certainly where I like is when I bring some of these strategies down to a departmental level and we start talking about the operating model there, we then start focusing again on what is that culture. And I had a great discussion with a lady in a CDO in one of the financial services, and she's now having to restart her rollout into Africa. And when I say restarted, there was almost a destruction of the data office, and they now wanted to start rebuilding. And she was saying, well, how does she go about it? How does she set this thing up? And I said, probably on your side it's quite critical for you to get your data strategies from a different regional level within that, and to also to then start focusing at your cultural level, because you may get some surprises in terms of the different way in which people perceive something. And of course, that's also going to have a big impact on your ethics and things like that. And if governance is to focus on doing the right things, the definition of right is not consistent across all of those countries and cultures. So when you want to say, this is right, and then we have to do it because it's the right thing to do, well, not everybody agrees with you. And so you got some challenges in terms of bringing in culture. All right. So we've sort of put down this cultural map model. We've said this is sort of where we want to be. Okay, so then what's the next step? What do you guys feel in terms of where do we start going from here? So what would you do if you've sort of agreed the culture, and now we got to start taking forward action in terms of structure and things like that? Oh. Okay. Okay, so I think you guys are way ahead of me, because when I first put this down, one of the things that I was unaware of, we actually, for one customer, we built the cultural map, and we tried to get people to go or to work it around that area. But what I wasn't aware of was the pitfalls. And this led me to start building something like this. So depending on the culture, you can now understand the pitfalls. So when you have cultivation, there's almost in some cases, a lack of direction and focus, or the inability to execute and complete, ignoring problems, valuing hard data, valuing feelings over hard data and facts. So there we got some challenges in terms of our data-driven, and need for perfect solutions, and then aversion towards control. And what came out nicely was, how do we now structure our governance to handle or to address some, and so we don't fall into that hole. And this for me was quite interesting when we spoke about it and discussed the ways in which we can bring about certain levels of control, certain levels of definition within data governance. How do we deal with this? And sorry, I've got some spelling mistakes there with not a caliper, but a caliber down the bottom here. Everyone sort of see what's going on here. Now you can go around the core, and I can show you the different areas, different things that I've tended to pick up as problems with a different type of culture, and then how do we deal with this in terms of our data governance, and then we can start with a roadmap and action plan, and then we can work with a change manager to say, okay, these are the things that we have to start to overcome, and the change manager starts the coffee sessions in terms of saying why it's so important and what they've got to look for.
So, Howard, to what extent do you think it would address this our problem if you have a reference architecture in place when you start?
Maybe I'm not fully understanding your question, but so if we talk about Corne, when we set up the data governance, we're gonna build in a data strategy. To do that, we then start designing the operating model, and typically your operating model has 4 pillars, and there's technology is part of it, people and culture is part of it, structural areas. And then you get some of the processes and the methods, and you get data structures or data value chains. Now, reference architecture will certainly help you when you define your operating model in terms of the reference architecture, in terms of enterprise technology. Is that what you're referring to, or am I missing?
Yes, because if you've got the reference architecture, to extent in your reference architecture, in my mind, you should address or at least refer, even if you don't have the detail at a very high level, be able to indicate, say, how am I going to do pitfalls, who's accountable for what, and all those kind of things. So it should be able to assist you in guiding the culture once the roles and responsibilities and the technology and all those kind of things are defined.
Yeah, and so that's exactly what your reference architecture wants to do is give you the blueprint and the guardrails in terms of bringing the technology about. But I suppose my focus here is more about how does culture respond to things like and a system. So how do we bring in systems that are helpful to the culture rather than can we get a system defined or a technology defined and then get everyone to respond to that thing? So it's a little bit like buying SAP and then transforming the business to work like SAP. I feel that the culture should be part of that reference architecture or helping us make decisions around the type of thing we're dealing with. You can find, I love those things where you go into different companies. Some people love the IBM governance, the IGC, and some people hate it. Then you go to another one and they like Calibra, but they hate, and so you get these wars around these different products. And you ask yourself why. They all do a similar thing. They all achieve, if you were to look at the features that the reference architecture may put down, they'd probably answer, both of them would answer the same thing. Be it Informatica, I love that in terms of Power BI versus Click versus Tableau versus Google Data Analytics. It's just, why do people make such, almost build their life around different areas? Does that? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Cornet.
Yes. It's just from where do you look at it and understand where you're looking from it. So right. That answers it to me.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I am looking in terms of what role does culture have on some of our laying out of our governance, our architecture, our data management approach. Some people are, I know some people that are just, everything's about open source, open thing. That's the type of world they want to live in. And they don't like the big organizations. So, but anyway, I just find things breaking, tools get broken, purchasing technology, hoping that it's going to work, only to find a failure, but it's really successful somewhere else. So what really made the difference? What made the success about that? But I in all the reference architectures I've looked at and worked with, I've never seen anybody talking about culture.
No, I'm with you.
Okay. All right. So for me, really is we're now sort of structuring this culture map or layout and model. We got to start working on it. We got to start measuring the change, where we headed towards, and we've got to start understanding how people respond. One of the big things, for example, I'd love someone to maybe have a stab at, if you were in a control culture, one of the pitfalls that you're going to avoid, that you know that are going to be there, and that you're going to have to build in special things for data governance to deal with? Anyone? How many of you guys are working in a culture that's highly controlled, or predominantly in the control area?
So, I think if we go back at the time I spent with you at the Reserve Bank, one of the good, that's a control area.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that helped with the culture were the information sessions, the different information sessions set up with the different business units. So it's just explain what it's about. And I think in a very short time, that showed the positive change, or while I was there, it showed in a short time the positive change, the attitude, and that's all also driving the culture towards accepting it, and then creating the culture of how do you manage your data.
Right. There's certainly those are the steps we take. We know that we have that control culture, so we know that we have to spend more time in providing the reason, and then the desire. Anybody else has a comment on that?
I also agree. I've been basically in the financial sector also. And most of the data are driven in incentives. They're basically risk associated. So most of the time we tend to forget about looking at like data governance from a cultural perspective. We just simply want to be compliant.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, that's an important point. And one of the things that I start seeing with control areas is almost a reticent to share the data, because they can get into trouble. And so it's not a free sharing environment. So they tend to hold on to the data. The silos tend to get more entrenched. The lack of understanding and not committing to just, have you seen this? Can you do that? And stuff like that. They tend to work. The risks are there. If they get caught by the auditor doing this and that, then everything gets closed down. So that, and so you start picking up immediately that I'm going to have these recommendations for data governance depending on a control culture. And you can work through all of them in terms of collaboration and competency. You can work through all of them, understanding the potential pitfalls that you're going to have.
Howard, would you say that also there may be an issue with, just the word that came to mind is you throttle the business in terms of their ability to move and to deliver innovation or new ideas or products to the market? So control, there's so many steps to have the control approve or get the approvals and the whole process that by the time it all happens, you've lost the edge, or
yes. So I mean, that's also one of the things that we picked up almost 4 years ago, where we did a systemic thinking, design thinking workshop for data governance. That was just before Cornet arrived. And one of the things that we came to us as almost a clap on the head was all we were focusing in some cases were our compliance as an outcome, not compliance as a driver. Okay, so when you're in the thing of, like Pumi spoke about, risk. So risk adverse is an outcome. So everything gets controlled. So instead of sharing with everybody, you don't allow any sharing. Instead of allowing people to get the data from wherever, you close that down, and everything's got to come through the single door. It's got to go out the single door, and so all of a sudden you throttle everything that needs to move, and sometimes not in the appropriate way.
I see. Okay.
So
also, I think an analogy used once about the brakes on a fast car.
Yeah.
Is that what you start to rather see that the brakes enable the speed rather than be a hindrance?
Yeah. So everybody sees governance as a hindrance rather than enabler. Zane?
Yeah, Howard. So I think, practically, and this is sort of, it's actually mind-blowing that it's so obvious that it's culture. But I think I mean, as a good example would be is, when we embarked on our data and analytics journey, the guys come in and their sort of approach is give us access to all the data. Yes. Everything needs to be open source. I want to develop fast. Right. I don't want to get stuck in corporate politics discussions.
All that stuff now.
And I mean, as they sort of hit the road running at like 200 kilometers per hour, and all of a sudden we have all these roadblocks because you have to fill in this form, and you have to go through this process, and if this guy didn't approve the data, then you can't have the data, and then you're actually slowing down something that came through like a sidecar, completely fast-paced environment. Now slows down to adapt to the rest of the organization, and it's culture. It's the only thing that it is. It's culture, because if you start interrogating a lot of those things, there's actually no reason why those things exist in most instances. It's just got inherited from previous regimes and previous ways of doing things. So yeah, so it's got a massive impact. I mean, we're seeing it on a daily basis, definitely.
Yeah. And all those innovation hubs. So I love that. I think I experienced my first skunk works down in Cape Town when I went down to see. It was Howard's place. I can't remember. Old Mutual, I think it was Old Mutual. And the skunk place, the skunk shop was right over the road. So I went to the wrong company, and they had just created a skunk work thing on across the road. And I was looking for people. I said, no, he no longer works here. And I was completely blown away. I then walked into the building across the road where this new project had been set up, and everything was different, from the way they sat, the way they operated with each other. And I was blown away by it. The interesting thing was I'd gone to see Mark Shuttleworth, who was working out of his garage before he made all that money. So that was like a mind blow, and to say, wow, okay, so you got to turn the way in which the thing works. I think it was 3-4 months later, I spoke to the person, and the whole thing had been canned. They had to integrate back into the company, and they couldn't get the movement and the deliverables that they wanted. So we keep on trying to build this completely separate culture environment, but it keeps failing a lot of the time. But anyway, that's I think that was really the key thing for me, was to realize how important this aspect is in our lives, and not to just focus on the technology or the data, or we got to start looking at the other sides of it. And so that's sort of to bring it to an end and stuff like that. What I was quite keen in terms of understanding from your guys is what was your most important takeaway of this session. And the number 3 should be hard and soft elements, not. And if you'd like to ask any questions before or during, now's the right time to.
Howard?
Yes.
How long did it take to draw up a culture map or a culture model?
Well, the first time I really battled. And fortunately I'd been to that session. So there are 2 ladies that really helped me. First of all, to get the right one, and then second of all, to do the assessment on the people. So they gave me a sort of checklist to walk through, and then they helped me to understand. So I think at the end, it took me about 4 months to put it all together, which was way too long from what I originally thought, which I said around about 2 weeks. So I was way out of that.
And how do you put this information together? Do you do whiteboard sessions, white hat thinking sessions, or what way do you find to do this?
So that when you're doing that, you tend to get some of the group thing coming out. So what I have done is done more on interviews, and then just to an extent observing. So you'll sort of you'll go into meetings and observe the way in which people respond. So that hippo thing, where it's the highest paid person in the room that people listen to, and so you sort of walk around like that. And then talking sometimes to HR and change management and getting their view, because they tend to be closer to that in terms of that sort of setup.
Okay. And do you validate your culture map or your culture model? Did you validate it with anybody else?
So the thing that was fascinating on the first iteration was I was working with the CDO, and we put so this was the map, almost the as is, and then we said, well, where do you want to be? And that was also a challenge in terms of saying, well, what is our preferred to be? And then we started looking at what some of the vision statements were, and then said, well, okay, well, how will culture support that? So what is the type of culture that's going to support that vision statement in that situation? So we did it with a small group of people, and then had to take it to the exco and management once that had been agreed. The interesting thing was, it's one of those things where you take it and you're a little bit nervous of putting it forward. But in putting it down, people started to say, yeah, that is where we are. The to be, we had a lot more discussion around the to be, but just the recognition that we are more of a control, more of collaboration, more of high performing, that was pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Great. So I can certainly help you guys if you want. In that, there were two ladies that really helped me. I was very thankful. And so if you need some help, willing to help out.
No, thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Howard. I think that will be really valuable. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks, guys. You got an early day today.
Brilliant.
Cool. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks
Good, man.
for the session. I've
Yeah.
never heard of a culture model before in my life. I've never seen a company. I don't think I've ever worked at a company that had one.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that blew me away is, when you look through the DM book and you got all these inputs and outputs, and there was a corporate culture model, and it's like, oh, does something like this exist?
Yeah. Interesting.
So, great.
Thanks so much, Howard.
Okay, guys.
Thanks. Cheers, bye.
Thank you. I would.
Great stuff.
Cool. So I sort of put this last slide in here to help us with the evening feedback.
Okay.
So, what was the most important takeaway? So, what they are saying here is that it's the hard and soft elements around culture, or the cultural map. So we probably find that the cultural map is something that would be nice to share with the LinkedIn community in terms of what models they're using, and how have they used these things, or are they aware of a culture map or things like that. Does that give you some guidance?
No, very good. Thanks, man. Yeah, because sure, this is actually these are some things that you never think about.
Yeah.
Well, they're there and they're entrenched and they're operating, whether you know it or not. And but what was interesting, if I can ask Howard, because I was going to ask, is there a target state?
Yes. You see that fourth one is designing the to-be culture.
Yes.
So the way we did it was to say, okay, if I want to achieve this target vision from a data strategy point of view, what's the sort of predominant culture that we need? Okay. So is it competency? Is it control? Is it collaboration? Now, we had some conflicting things, because we were saying that we wanted industry collaboration amongst the regulators, but we wanted competency for our advanced analytics. So we had these two opposing strategic themes in our data strategy.
Sure. Okay. And then you, by doing an as-is mapping, it helps or supports your investigation or understanding of why you are where you are.
Yes, correct. The SWOTs.
Brilliant. Eh?
So not many people say that our culture doesn't support this way of working or this technology or whatever it is.
Gee whiz. It's fascinating, eh? Jeez.
Yeah.
And I suppose different industry or different types of businesses, their to-be state would be almost dictated by that industry, like you say.
Yeah.
Banking would be higher in control because of regulations and all these things. But
if you look at your startups and disruptors, there it's all about competency, right? High performing teams.
yes,
When you look at things that are for the greater good, then you tend to be the sort of collaboration / cultivating type of thing. So if you look at things like gender violence type of things, then they're going to be more cultivating.
yes.
And so it is very much in terms of the type of things that you're dealing with, that tends to be the dominant culture.
And I love and I don't know if I've interpreted your third one there, culture eats strategy, correctly. But when I read it, I thought this is like, yeah, this culture can destroy your.
Oh, it does. It does.
What you meant, right?
Yeah.
No, hundreds. That's what you're questioning. You're throwing money at why the strategy is not happening, and it's just simple.
Yeah.
Answer is in your people and your oil, not just your people.
And the sort of direction you set, right? So as a leader, you're responsible for that direction and the way in which things happen.
Yes.
So if you don't tolerate failure, if you don't tolerate, or if you just tolerate cum si, cum sa, and stuff like that, if you don't take those things and say, it doesn't mean that you're just easy going. If you're demanding but the people see that you can, even if you fail and you learn and you keep going, then that's the type of thing that you're breeding in, the innovation, the things of wanting to do stuff better. It's not just shucks, I got it done and it's cool, I made the deliverable and it's fine.
Sure.
No, did you do a crappy job or
Jeez, man. I like to say, wow. Because all the other stuff, you can buy a tool, you can do this.
Yeah.
But it's this guy that's
I mean, this is what I was trying to say to Cornet. We can buy a tool, but are we buying the right tool?
Yeah. And I also enjoyed what you said about nothing against SAP, but exactly that. You buy SAP, you are adopting SAP culture.
Yeah.
And if you don't know that, at the worst case scenario, you're just going to fight all day long and be frustrated.
Yeah.
If you're aware of it, then you need to bring that culture into your business. Otherwise, again, you're going to just be fighting culture versus culture.
And then do I go with Google Plus, or do I go with Google technology, or do I go with Microsoft technology, or do I go with Apple stuff? All of those things are interrelated. And, we can say, don't worry, you can bring whatever device you have, but they bring cultural things into it, and behaviors and norms and things like that. Or do we go Linux? Which one?
Yeah. And funny, because and I didn't click until now. Actually, I remember I was with Lance, and just before I actually met you, I was considering studying and becoming SAP accredited.
Yes. Yeah.
Doing SAP courses and all that, because he was threatening to buy or someone was busy talking to him about a SAP tool. And I remember saying to him, I'm quite excited because I think, and I've heard about guys that are doing well with SAP and et cetera. That's what the level of talk was. And I remember his words. He said, Paul, be careful. Not saying that SAP is bad. And I mean, obviously guys are making good livings off this stuff. But he said to me, the reason I'm not getting SAP is because SAP will come here, drop their tool and tell me how to do business.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And don't get yourself caught up in that. That was his advice to me. Maybe just from a personality type kind of view.
No. It is exactly like that. And some people, they're exactly happy and they get about conformance and stuff like that. But that's what they start delivering is factory workers.
Yeah. My word. Yeah, what a subject, eh? Wow.
Cool.
No, great. Thanks, Captain. Appreciate it.
Okay, buddy. But this is something that I remember sharing with you in terms of that Bible MBA.
Yes.
How do we bring the biblical culture in here? How does that mold our corporate culture?
Yes.
And so these are critical things that we got to think about. and we have to build, you know.
Well, funny because yesterday on the stand during the stand-up, I think it was yesterday, I was talking to you and Veronica were not on the call, and I was saying because Andy was asking about design and all, and I said to them all, I said, guys, not that I have the answer, we need to get your input from, meaning Howard and Veronica, but I said we have to start understanding what data culture is, because if we want to ramp up in terms of our business side of things, where we're selling courses and that, we've got to bring that, we've got to create that culture. It's almost like a cult or a gang, you know. This gang stands for this and this gang stands for this. We need to become a data gang. And have the speak and have the attitude and have the excitement and all these, which will attract members. And then as you're attracting members, you're then able to do your business and sell and all that. And so that's what we're missing, is a good description of this gang, you know.
So for me, it's knowledge driven.
So that was trying to just drive that concept with the guys on the call. This is what
that's right.
We got to catch. And
we got to be able to relate to this data thing, you know. We got to demonstrate it.
Yes. Now, like I said to Debbie this morning about her reporting and all that, and I said, Debbie, check it this week, okay? And I can look at every single week since we started, bar for maybe the first one. Every week, the most attendance has been the data citizens.
Yeah.
So, is it the day, Tuesdays, or is it what data citizen means, the perception of what that means to people out there, that they get it, and they're attracted to it, and they want to be part of it? Because why are the others not filling up?
Yeah.
So I said, so maybe what we do in 3 weeks' time is we actually swap the days around to see, is it the day or is it actually the term data management for data citizens that's working? And I said, we can't decide on that until we see numbers. And that's I was just trying to explain the value of reporting.
Yeah.
Because, and maybe just to share this with you, and I need some help actually in how I explain it, because for both Debbie and Mbali, I'm not getting it through that they still don't have something on paper, meaning whether it's in Word or PowerPoint or Excel, obviously, hopefully, they don't have their measurements or their metrics written and being tracked. They're not getting that. And Mbali asked me, and I'm not criticizing her, I'm just saying, she phoned me to say, Paul, I don't understand what you're asking, because on the call, I give you the metric. I said, yes, that's fine. You're learning what the metrics are and what you should be looking at, and you've got benchmarks, and you can compare it to what's happening in our world, but where are you recording it so that we've got a trend, we can watch the trends, we can have a history.
And link actions to it, right? So I took this action, this is what happened. So that means I should be going more there. And then
100%.
How does that metric of yours translate into bums on seats?
100%. And but they're not getting that part, both of them.
No, both of them, you're right.
I still don't have, even if it's like I said on a piece of scrap, even a form of recording.
Yeah.
Whether someone's even written it down in pencil, that would be good enough. But please, I'm not criticizing. They just can't.
No. It's critical. They got to snap out of this thing of we'll just do and do and do and do and do and do and do.
They just can't see that next step of actually recording my activity.
And then questioning myself as to whether I'm doing the right thing. So it's got to be. That's where I say we're knowledge driven. What is it that's increasing our knowledge? What do we do to understand what we don't know, and to what is it that I don't understand? What is it that I need to know?
Yes.
You know.
So apart from me actually designing a little Excel spreadsheet for each one,
and I think we may do that, and I think we may need to, just to let the penny drop and finally to say that, because I've asked Debbie on repeated occasions to say where and what do we have in terms of LinkedIn analytics. We can't. You guys can look at this one little post and that thing, and it's not sustainable. So what are we going to do about collecting LinkedIn analytics? Right. And she did talk to somebody, and it was a bit of a disaster. The results that they showed were were more about the different groups and not about Howard Diesel. So it's like, guys, I don't know what you're showing here, but this doesn't look to me like we understanding what it is that we need to analyze on the situation. And she agreed, but she didn't know where to go from there. Now, and I think that's something we drive a lot with Dylan. And that's got to be paramount, and that message has got to keep coming through in terms of everything's got to be measurable. Everything we do, we decide based on data.
Yes.
And I think it's easy for us because I don't know anything about marketing. So the only thing I know is something about data. So show me the data and then I understand the decision. Don't show me the data and then you guys can just be putting your finger in every single dike hoping that something's going to work.